Mogadishu, Somalia, and this is CNN.
Welcome back to Connect the World. We're live for you in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, awaiting the US President's arrival after what has been a stretch of frosty relations with their long-time ally. I'm Becky Anderson. Hello and welcome back to Connect the World. US President Joe Biden and the Israeli caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid agree that Iran should not be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon, but they don't agree on the best way to prevent it. The pair signed a new joint declaration to expand the security relationship between the US and Israel on what is Joe Biden's first leg of his Middle East trip. Afterwards, each addressed their concerns about Iran's nuclear program.
Today, you and I also discussed America's commitment to ensuring Iran never obtains a nuclear weapon. This is a vital security interest to both Israel and the United States, and I would add, for the rest of the world as well. I continue to believe that diplomacy is the best way to achieve this outcome.
Words will not stop them, Mr. President. Diplomacy will not stop them. The only thing that will stop Iran is knowing that if they continue to develop their nuclear program, the free world will use force.
Well, the US President is meeting today with Israeli leaders. Tomorrow he'll meet with Palestinian leaders, and then he'll travel here to Jeddah to meet with Saudi leaders, and on Saturday leaders from the GCC plus Egypt, Israel and Jordan. CNN's correspondent based in Jerusalem is Hadass Gold, joining me live right now. And as you and I speak, Hadass, we are watching pictures of a ceremony where Israeli President Isaac Herzog will give US President Joe Biden the Presidential Medal of Honor. Let's just bring those pictures up there. Much warmth between Biden and the Israelis during this visit. Less so, it seems, for and with the Palestinians, Hadass.
Yeah, I mean, so far for this visit, the Israelis are hearing a lot of what they want to hear from President Biden. You know, from the moment when he was on the tarmac making his remarks, saying things like you don't need to be a Jew to be a Zionist, saying that he has a bone-deep support for Israel, for its security, signing what they're calling the Jerusalem Declaration, just its name by itself, a sign. And he even said it explicitly that America is still recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, one of the Trump administration moves. And these are all things that Israel wants to hear. The Americans also saying this is about the state-to-state relationship, that it goes beyond whoever is in power, whatever the internal political dynamics are going on, that it's a state-to-state relationship because, of course, Prime Minister Yair Lapid has only been prime minister for all of 2 weeks, and he's a caretaker prime minister before elections are being held. As you noted, right now we are seeing President Biden alongside the Israeli President Isaac Herzog. President Biden will receive the Israeli Presidential Medal of Honor. This is the highest honor in Israel. It's been given to people like Angela Merkel, Elie Wiesel. So it's clearly a show of sort of the warmth and the depth of the relationship between the two. President Biden often likes to say that he has been a lifelong supporter of Israel, that he has met every Israeli prime minister since Golda Meir. This is his 10th time to the region. But as you noted, one thing that we haven't been hearing much of over the last day and a half or so is any sort of real progress towards a two-state solution with the Palestinians, a peace process with the Palestinians. President Biden once again reaffirmed his support for a two-state solution, but he himself acknowledged that he understands it's likely not going to happen in the near future. I should note that it's also notable that Prime Minister Yair Lapid also noted his support for the two-state solution, which is a change with this new prime minister. But for most Palestinians, and for much, especially the everyday Palestinians, there's a lot of disappointment in what they see are unfulfilled promises from the Biden administration. 5 years ago, on his last visit to the White House, the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas made a rare venture into English.
Now, Mr. President, with you, we have hope.
Several months later, that hope proved to have been terribly misplaced.
It is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Under Donald Trump, U.S. policy tilted heavily towards Israel. The Palestinian political office in Washington was closed. The American consulate in Jerusalem, which symbolized U.S.-Palestinian relations, also closed, and almost all economic aid to the Palestinians was switched off. So when Joe Biden won the election, there was great relief among many in the Palestinian community. But that relief has little to show in terms of action. The Biden administration highlights renewed financing, about $500 million, mostly on schools, hospitals, and other humanitarian aid projects. Further $100 million is set to be announced on this trip, including some money for Palestinian hospitals in East Jerusalem. But politically, the White House seems unwilling to pressure Israel over continued expansion of West Bank settlements and weak in the face of Israel's resistance over plans to reopen the consulate in Jerusalem. Hussein Sheikh is one of Abbas's closest aides.
The U.S. administration has been talking with us about these issues for more than a year, but nothing has been achieved. Even so, we continue to hope this visit will produce serious outcomes, that it provides hope and a political horizon.
Biden's visit to the West Bank will take him not to Ramallah, the headquarters of the Palestinian Authority, but to Bethlehem, just a few miles south of Jerusalem, where the president will find it hard to avoid stark reminders of the conflict.
One issue that will likely be staring President Biden right in the face, the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. This giant mural of the Al Jazeera journalist is right on the road you take as you enter Bethlehem.
For many here, the U.S. response to the death of the Palestinian-American reporter, shot dead while covering an Israeli military operation, has been inadequate and indicative, they believe, of the U.S.'s unwillingness to force Israel to get serious about peace and bringing an end to occupation.
Putting an end to this injustice, putting an end to this impunity is important because it sheds light, it continues to shed light on the greater picture of what Palestinians continue to endure on a daily basis.
From the Palestinian perspective, the overwhelming feeling around the president's visit is one of pessimism. Becky, tomorrow President Biden will head to Bethlehem, where he will meet with the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. And I think it will be really interesting to see what the tone, what the body language is like between the two leaders. It will be also interesting to see, Becky, whether they issue some sort of joint statement, whether the two sides had come to an agreement on the substance of a joint statement, or whether the two leaders will issue separate statements. And I think that will tell us a lot about how the Palestinians right now feel about the Biden administration. Becky.
Hadass Gold is in Jerusalem, as is President Biden. Let's just listen in. He is with the Israeli President, Isaac Herzog.
All of you, and you know that my love for Israel is deep-rooted. I was raised, as we say and you say, by a righteous Christian, my dad. And I've had the honor, it's hard to say these words, for over 50 years. It can't be that long, but for over 50 years, and the federal government helping build the relationship. 50 years ago, we'd never had this audience before. We're not having this audience out here. We had so many people representing so many different nations and faiths as well, and it's important. Seeing Israel thrive, seeing the wildest dreams of Israel's founding fathers and mothers grow into reality that Israel children enjoy today, to me is close to miraculous. You're always we use in the Catholic Church a hymn that's based on one of the Psalms, and it says, "May He raise you up on eagle's wings and bear you on the breath of dawn. Until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of His hand." Well, every time I've come over these years, thank God, God seems to be holding us in the palm of His hand, because we get stronger, not weaker. And to me, it's pretty miraculous. The Torah tells the story of the prophet who described the ancient Israelis as the people that dwell alone. And the Torah portion that will be read in services across the United States this week. I know, President Herzog, that your uncle also wrote a book with that title. But as I look out on this proud, strong Israelis in the audience, at the nation that made the desert bloom and built the Iron Dome, I see people who are growing more secure, more integrated, more confident, and more have greater relationships with their neighbors. A nation that has forged peace before and can do it again. and a nation that will never dwell alone. Because as long as the United States, you will never, ever be alone. And as you know, there's still so much more work to be done. That's why America's commitment to Israel's security remains ironclad. Today and in the future, that commitment is not about me or any other American president. It springs from a deep affinity and enduring connection between our peoples. And it is our responsibility as leaders to nurture that bond, to ensure that it grows stronger, deeper, and broader as we navigate the challenges ahead, and they will continue to be profound and they will change. And as a leader, I can say without hesitation that being known as a friend of Israel and receiving this award today is among the greatest honors of my career, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
All right, Joe Biden there. Being given the Presidential Medal of Honor by the Israeli president. After that leg, of course, Mr. Biden is on his way here to Saudi Arabia, and he's looking for a reset with the kingdom after ties have reached a low point, it has to be said. My next guest, writing the Wall Street Journal, says, and I quote, driving the shift towards a more traditional US Middle East strategy, in part, is the impact of high energy prices on US inflation rates, which is proving a significant political liability for Mr. Biden. Stephen Carlin is a Middle East correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, and he's here with me now in Jeddah. These are interesting times because, to all intents and purposes, the Saudis hold an awful lot of cards, don't they, when it comes to the relationship with Washington at present?
Yeah, especially in terms of energy. I think the president has been reminded that Saudi Arabia is the producer with the biggest spare capacity, and at a time where oil prices went up over $140 briefly earlier this year, inflation is rising back home. He's come to Saudi Arabia hoping that, in tandem with maybe a few of the other producers, they can get some relief on oil prices and gas prices. I don't think anything's likely during this weekend. The White House has been sort of lowering expectations for an immediate decision on this, but it seems like there could be something coming in the coming months.
I was interested to note that we are hearing energy security as the buzzword, and the president of the UAE yesterday in an address to the nation, which is actually first as far as I can remember, talking about being a reliable partner for the world in energy security. It seems to me that it's less about oil production, can we pump, should we pump more in the short term, and about the kind of wider story of energy security going forward, correct?
That's right, and energy stability, price stability, this is something that the Saudis have always been pushing for, because it's key to their, integral to their economy as much as they're trying to diversify away from oil. The price of oil still does impact the Saudi budget, so they want to see stable prices, they want to see stable consumption and predictability. At the moment, one of the things that's holding the Saudis back from pumping more oil is this years-long deal with Russia and other producers, OPEC Plus, to keep oil production at a certain level, and they put in a lot of effort and energy into that, and they're not really interested in walking away from it right now.
This is a very different region that the US president will be coming to, not least because a number of Arab countries have normalized relations with Israel. Joe Biden wants to see more of that. He specifically wants to see, and he's making no bones about it, normalization with Saudi Arabia. Is that likely?
It's not likely. It's not in the offing right now. I think the Saudis are also interested in that. They have made it clear that the standard, the requirement, the prerequisite for that hasn't changed for them, and that is a solution to the Palestinian issue. They haven't backed off of that, but there is more interest. Some of my colleagues reported a couple weeks ago about a meeting in Egypt where the Israelis participated with members of other Arab states that are going to be here tomorrow or on Saturday, and so there is an interest in working more closely with Israel, especially against the threat from Iran.
From the perspective of the Gulf and other Middle Eastern countries, I wonder what you believe Washington brings to the table at this point, because we are already seeing a de-escalation of tensions. You and I live in this region. We are well aware that a number of the regional heavyweights, not least the UAE, for example, are talking about regional de-escalation of tensions, the bolstering of regional ties. We are seeing that not just on an economic front, but on a security front as well. And the emergence, for example, of a mini quad in the US, India, Israel, and the UAE. It's a fascinating time. And to a certain extent, for some months now, there's been this argument that goes, do we really need Washington in all of this? You know, ISET, you know, on China, big market for the likes of the UAE and the Saudis. They got Russia as a friend. We're talking about before the invasion of Ukraine. So I just wonder, what do you believe the Middle East wants to hear from Washington on this trip?
I think they're looking to hear a vision from the president. I think that's what he plans to present on Saturday to the summit of 9 Arab leaders. But a lot of what you're describing, I mean, the normalization with Israel, also repairing ties between Turkey and the UAE, Turkey and Egypt, a number of rivalries that have been sort of walked back from the edge in the last year or two. A lot of that has to do, I mean, some of that is individual initiatives from these countries, but a lot of it is these countries feeling, especially in the last few years with the withdrawal from Afghanistan last summer, but more broadly over the past 15, 20 years, they're feeling this ebb and flow of U.S. politics, which is felt here in the region. You know, when they're questioning the U.S. commitment to the region. Are they always going to be a reliable partner? And when they see once, twice, 3 times that they can't really rely on the U.S. the way they used to be able to, they start to look to other partners, and they start to look to each other and saying, maybe we need to take care of our issues together.
The US president comes to a country which is evolving rapidly under the stewardship of the de facto leader here, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The price of oil helps for him to be able to deliver on his Vision 2030, which is very, very, very ambitious. But we see so much of that happening around us here, and the push to support other countries around the region who are suffering at present, be that Egypt or Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. Just how significant a power player is the kingdom here under de facto leadership of MBS?
Well, I mean, Saudi Arabia has always been quite a significant player, but it's, for many, many years, was sort of looking in on it itself and not really open to the world. Now it's trying to look more outside its borders to invite tourists in, to relax some of the cultural and social norms that make it easier to live here. They've made some significant progress. They still have a long way to go. And one of the issues, obviously, that the president is being pressured to raise here is that the human rights concerns that have not improved. So it's sort of a mixed bag. But largely, Saudi Arabia has been evolving and changing, and we're seeing a lot of cultural production, for example, that's now being exported out to the region. Egypt used to be a major hub for Arab language production. A lot of that's now happening in Saudi Arabia. So as well as an economic power, it's now looking more like a political and social
Donald Trump always talked about the opportunity from the oil money that would flow into the American economy. I mean, how much will Joe Biden be looking to take advantage of Saudi investment?
Well, I think that's always been true, and it hasn't really changed. I mean, Saudis are big investors in a range of assets in the U.S. One thing that I've noticed, the difference between this trip and President Trump's trip 5 years ago, was that at that time there was a U.S.-Saudi CEO Business Council meeting. There was a lot of emphasis, and of course, President Trump was always talking about how much the Saudis were investing in the economy, buying weapons from the U.S. President Biden isn't doing that. He's here for a relatively brief period of time, around 24 hours. He's going to have a meeting with the Saudi leadership, and then he's trying to put the emphasis on this summit tomorrow with the Arab leaders.
Yeah, Saturday. It's only
Saturday,
Thursday.
right.
I know what you mean. It's nice to have you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, earlier I talked with John Kirby of the National Security Council at the White House. I asked him if President Biden's staff is worried about how the visit to Saudi Arabia will play back in the United States. Here's the answer to that question.
The president's looking forward to his trip to Saudi Arabia here in the next day or so. There's an awful lot on the agenda, Becky. You talked about a bilateral discussion, and there will be with King Salman and his leadership team, which of course includes the Crown Prince. And then there'll be a full day on Saturday in the context of the Gulf Cooperation Council +3. And my goodness, between those two sets of meetings, there's an awful lot of ground to cover. The president's looking forward to having a discussion here with 9 leaders in the region, 9 state leaders leaders on things as diverse as counterterrorism, the threat of Iran, which you and I have just been talking about, the continued ceasefire in Yemen, and seeing that gets continued, and that we've had the longest now period of peace in Yemen that we've had in 7 years. So literally thousands of Yemeni lives have probably been saved by the stoppage of the conflict there. And there's a robust agenda. The president will greet these leaders, all of them, in the same way that he's been greeting leaders around the world, and he's looking forward to a robust agenda. And his focus is not on the greetings themselves. His focus is on the actual agenda and the topics that have to be furthered and discussed in Saudi Arabia.
Well, we do a deep dive on all the biggest stories and trends out of the Middle East. That is in the newsletter, Meanwhile in the Middle East, and you can subscribe to that. That web address is there for you on your screen. Just enter your email address. Right, coming up, devastation in central Ukraine. The death toll keeps rising after Russian cruise missiles destroy dozens of buildings and leave a pile of mangled cars in the streets. We're live on the ground with the latest for you.
Last year, the very first motorcycle with radar. And what that's allowed us to do is to be able to put some technology in the motorcycle that gives features of safety for the rider, including blind spot indicators that's been used on cars for years. So we're not only dedicated to that performance, but also to try and improve our environmental impact and also the safety for the riders themselves.
Living Golf. Visit the home of golf, St Andrews, for the 150th Open Championship.
The Open is like the window to the world for us.
Capture the atmosphere and action of this landmark major. Plus, hear from Open Championship legend Tom Watson.
The course starts from the town and ends in the town, and it's nothing like it.
Living Golf, Saturday on CNN, in association with Gulf Saudi.
Welcome back. We're live from Jeddah for you, and we have a lot more on President Biden's historic trip to this region in just a little while. First, though, I do want to get you up to speed on our other top stories around the world. And Ukraine says Russian cruise missiles launched from submarines in the Black Sea have destroyed dozens of buildings and cars in the central Ukrainian city of Vinnytsia. At least 22 people were killed in that attack. 3 children are among them. Dozens of people were injured and are missing. And in the south, the city of Mykolaiv is under an intense barrage of Russian missiles as well. This school and other residential buildings were hit. Well, Scott McLean joining us live from Vinnytsia. And just describe what you are seeing there, Scott.
Becky, we've had a chance to be on the scene here for about an hour or an hour and a half, and I'll just show you around quickly. So there's a streetcar here out on the main road. This is not close to where one of the missiles actually struck, and yet all the windows of that streetcar are completely blown out. Let me show you the rest of the scene. They're starting to remove cars from this area that were burnt out. I'll show you that in a second. Even across the street, there are stores that are the window fronts completely blown out. These are some firefighters who would have been on the scene for an entire day. We'll have to get out of the way because obviously there's a truck here, crane here that's trying to move. This is a very active site. What's odd here, Becky, is that we've essentially been given free rein to wander wherever we want, which is unusual in any domestic kind of situation. Clearly, the Ukrainians want the world to see exactly what happened here up close and in detail. We can show you inside of this building. It's called the House of Officers, but it is actually a concert hall. It's a concert venue. We understand that there was a concert scheduled for this evening. It was in use. Vinnytsia is nowhere near the front lines, so civilian activities are still very much taking place. There's an absolute swarm of activity here. It's remarkable just how many officials here from fire, from police, from territorial defense, from the military are here trying to put out the last bits of hot spots. Let me just show you here, Becky, quickly. If you see, this is where one of the impact sites was of the missile. It took a direct hit on the building, is what we're told, and so you can only imagine what it looks like inside, considering what it looks like outside. The entirety of the roof is completely gone. The middle floor looks like it's completely gone. And so that bomb would have very likely penetrated down to the lowest floor of this building before it detonated. And you can just, I mean, it's terrifying to think of the force that would have done this kind of damage. Let me show you one other thing, if I can here, quickly, Becky. This is the other impact site. And so you can see over here, all of these other burnt out cars would have caught fire quite quickly because of the force of the explosion. And so this is where, sorry, I don't want to get run over here. This is where one of the missiles would have actually landed. And I just want to come down in here just to give you a bit of scale here to show you just how big this crater actually is. Remember, this is not dirt. This is a concrete asphalt parking lot, and you can imagine how much force you would need to create a hole this big. You can see even all the scarring on the pavement here as well from all the shrapnel shooting up at this building here. I'll just give you a better angle here if I can. You can see from the very top floor, it's maybe a 8 or 10 story building, every single window that I can tell at least is completely blown out. What likely saved a lot of people's lives is the fact that there's a concrete wall there that looks like it has only a few small pock marks from the shrapnel. Clearly this section of the building that's burnt out would have sheltered a lot of the rest of the building from the blast. We spoke to one woman who was on the 4th floor at the time of the blast. She doesn't have a single scratch on her, and she did not seek shelter. She did not go down to the basement or anything like that. So right now they're just trying to, people who have offices in there are just trying to get their stuff out, get it to somewhere where they can take it. And if we have time, Becky, I just want to show you one other thing, because the latest death toll, if I have the correct numbers, at least 22 people dead. They've only managed to identify 6 bodies though, which tells you something about the state that these bodies were in when they found them. 3 of the bodies were children, which makes this particularly upsetting for people. And particularly upsetting was the photo that the foreign minister sent out earlier showing a child laying lifeless next to a stroller or a buggy. And this is it here. The police are just putting it in this bag. I can only assume that they're preserving it for evidence of what the Ukrainians are already calling terrorism. They're calling a war crime. They're calling an intentional strike on a civilian target, and an intentional strike that has had deadly consequences for not just adults, but for at least 3 children as well. We're told that there are also some children who are amongst the injured, and there are a few dozen people now still who are unaccounted for. And remember, we're nowhere near the front lines, and so oftentimes when the air raid sirens go off, Becky, it's not like people are running for cover necessarily. This is Vinica. We're nowhere near danger typically, and so a lot of people would have likely stayed where they are. A lot of people would have likely chosen not to seek shelter. A lot of people would have likely gone about their normal business. Clearly, though, this is a wake-up call for people who live in this part of Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, thank you. The reality of life on the ground there in Vinica, as Scott says, some distance away from the front line. All right, just moments ago, Sri Lanka's president formally resigned. She emailed a letter of resignation to Parliament, which will allow the Prime Minister to temporarily step in as acting president when Parliament finds a permanent replacement. Mr. Rajapaksa, who fled Sri Lanka after protesters stormed his residence, arrived in Singapore a short time ago aboard this plane. Singapore says he's been given permission to enter the country on a private visit, but has not asked for or been granted asylum. Well, just ahead, after sending a start message to Tehran, Joe Biden faces warming up to Saudi Arabia. How the US president's Middle East trip is playing out in the region and at home. That's next.
Summer in Abu Dhabi. It's everything you want, but so much more than you'd expect. It's relaxing days at the pool in water as chilled as your drink. It's bonding with family, but upside down. And even more so, it's burning rubber on an F1 racetrack, roller coasters breaking records. It's seizing the day or owning the night. It's literally drinking 23 karat gold. It's uniquely designed to make it the summer of your dreams. Abu Dhabi has everything you need to summer like you mean it.
When you dream more, you need to move more. With over 45% of sub-Saharan Africa using mobile money, innovative digital payment solutions are giving people financial freedom. Access FacePay uses AI to make transactions more secure and accessible for over 31 million customers. Access. More than banking.
This is a really important story. My name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN. Assalamu alaikum. Day in, day out, you see the reality of people living through this. Ничего страшного. Okay. This is the front line. On a human level, you find courage, sacrifice. This is what life is about. A lot of people are wondering why. You see the worst of humanity.
Putin might use a nuclear weapon. Absolutely terrifying.
But you also see the best of humanity. My job is to be present. The human cost is right here. And to tell these stories.
We're talking about families.
That is the most important thing. I'm Clarissa Ward in Ukraine. This is CNN.
I'm Paulo Sandoval in Bogota, Colombia, and this is CNN.
Back to our top story. US President Joe Biden's first tour as president of the Middle East. Earlier, Mr. Biden and the Israeli caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid agreed on a commitment to ensure that Iran never obtains a nuclear weapon. On Friday, Mr. Biden is scheduled to meet with Palestinian officials in Bethlehem. And a visit to Saudi Arabia later is, well, some controversy over the kingdom's human rights record, including the killing of a Saudi Arabian journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, casting somewhat of a cloud over this trip, not least at home for Joe Biden. Joining us live from Jerusalem is CNN's chief White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins. What, to your mind, are the key takeaways from this, the first leg of this tour to the Middle East? Caitlin?
Well, certainly it's his first stop here in the Middle East, making it Israel. That was intentional from the White House, and you saw today he had this lengthy meeting with the Prime Minister here, Prime Minister Lapid, and then came out and had this press conference where they talked really about their main priorities. And of course, Iran was the sharpest divide between these two leaders because they both agree that Iran should not obtain a nuclear weapon, and they're warning of the consequences of what happens if Iran does do that. But they disagree on the strategy of how to make sure that that doesn't happen. And you saw the Prime Minister Lapid come out, push very forcefully on President Biden about using force, having the free world use force if Iran continues with its program to develop a nuclear weapon. But then you saw quite different language from President Biden. Here's a preview of what he argued.
I want to make clear that we can continue to lead in the region and not create a vacuum that is filled by China and or Russia against the interest of both Israel and the United States and many other countries.
And the president went on to talk about with the view basically that he has when he talks about using force as a last resort to stop Iran from actually obtaining a nuclear weapon. So the difference there in the language of obtaining a nuclear weapon, while Lapid was talking about the program simply to continue developing one. Those are the sharp differences there. But then, of course, the other clear takeaway from today's press conference was his failure to say that he will bring up Jamal Khashoggi's name when he sits down with the Saudi Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia on Friday. It's just 24 hours from now when he's expected to do that. And instead, he just told reporters his feelings are well known on what happened with Jamal Khashoggi. He has called it a flat-out murder. He has criticized the government of Saudi Arabia, saying they have little social redeeming value. But he did not commit specifically to bringing it up. And that's because his administration and his top aides are really developing right now how they are going to handle a very sensitive visit that is on the horizon for President Biden.
Yeah, see you here, Caitlin. Thank you. We are in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. Let's take a very quick break. More in just a moment.
Following the great success of the 29th Afreximbank annual meetings in Cairo, Afreximbank would like to thank His Excellency, the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, the Central Bank of Egypt, representatives of heads of state, government officials, dignitaries, our illustrious speakers, sponsors, and all attendees. The meetings featured a full program of events, bringing together high-profile continental and global leaders to harness and leverage Africa's incredible potential. Afreximbank.
Take you somewhere new, show me burgundy sunset sky, let's fly, to fly, to fly, to fly.
Wherever you go in the world, one airline goes further to make it feel exceptional. Qatar Airways, going places together.
I'm Nick Robertson in London, and this is CNN.
I'm Julia Chatterley. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers.
First Move with Julia Chatterley, weekdays on CNN.
Well, a recap of a developing story this hour. Sri Lanka's president has now formally resigned. Gotabaya Rajapaksa emailed a letter of resignation to Parliament, which now will allow the Prime Minister to temporarily step in as acting president while Parliament finds a permanent replacement. Mr. Rajapaksa, who fled Sri Lanka after protesters stormed his residence, arrived in Singapore a short time ago aboard this plane. Singapore says he's been given permission to enter the country on a private visit, but has not asked for or been granted asylum. Meantime, these are pictures of people celebrating in Colombo. And protest organisers said they'll stand down from protesting in and outside government buildings, apart from that presidential palace, where you saw images over the weekend of people, quite frankly, sort of enjoying themselves as they got to experience that public building. All right, that's this story out of Colombo, Sri Lanka, where the time is 9:09 p.m. Well, it's Biden will be here in Jeddah tomorrow to meet with Saudi officials before a wider meeting with regional leaders on Saturday. And he will come to a country and a city much changed. The Saudi Crown Prince has a new vision for the future of his country. It's not one, though, that every Saudi shares. Our Nick Robertson explains.
President Joe Biden might see this on his way to meeting Saudi's leaders. Whole neighborhoods of the kingdom's historic second city, Jeddah, erased for modernization. Or he may see this: thousands upon thousands of new homes being built on government orders.
What Biden is unlikely to see are the people we met who told us they're unhappy their homes were demolished, but are afraid to speak out publicly.
The housing changes are a fragment of massive reforms authored by the kingdom's leader-in-waiting, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, whom Saudi critics outside the country say is failing to deliver.
It's very clear there is a big fail with the vision, basically because it is a one-man vision.
Yet stroll Jeddah's old streets, as we did, and you'll find plenty of fans of the Crown Prince. Abdul Majid was one of them. Nabil Abdullah, another.
My dream, our children get a good chance. Now we are see this in New Vision 2030.
Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030.
I'm with him, I agree with him.
Where generations of his family lived and worked, the Crown Prince's renovations bringing ancient homes back to life.
But what happens if he doesn't deliver? He can't deliver.
Why you think negative? We already now see the positive something happen. Why you think that if we see the thing about negative, we cannot go one step?
But MBS's dreams are big and could make or break the country. Neom, a futuristic city yet to be built, its epicenter, and if the Crown Prince has his way, its economic engine for generations to come. Yet, despite several years in the making, developers' videos are all we have. Government permission to shoot there hasn't yet been facilitated. Grandiose visions of kings are nothing new here. The last king, Abdullah, had his version. I covered it 15 years ago.
It is going to be half the size of total Bahrain and 3 times Manhattan.
3 times the size of Manhattan?
Yes.
Reality never caught up with imagination. Hundreds of thousands of proposed jobs never materialized.
MBS's vision will be the test of him at every level. If there are jobs and a brighter future for most people, then happy days. But if his reforms falter, even fail, how will he respond? If it's through repression, then his relationship with President Biden and other Western leaders could crumble.
For now, leverage is mostly on MBS's side, a pivotal regional power with vital energy supplies at a time of US need.
He managed to basically make the Biden administration back down on all its promises regarding Saudi Arabia and MBS.
Haflul's sister, a women's rights activist, was freed from Saudi jail, but not the country, not long after Biden called for her release early last year. She fears MBS will read Biden's visit as approval for more arrests.
Repression will never stop as MBS is in power. It's about the person he is, and the only thing that could change things is accountability from the international community.
Biden's time in Jeddah will be a harsh reminder, a real politique at its toughest. Nick Robertson, CNN, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
Well, that's it for today for our special coverage. We will, though, be back here tomorrow, same time, same place, as President Biden arrives in Jeddah here in Saudi Arabia. Look forward to seeing you then.
Story, you may be asked to take risks.
These protests are a test for Hamas.
Where Iraqi troops would pre-position and these Americans would advise them.
The protesters are just outside a military base. They're throwing rocks.
Any understanding between Israel and Gaza could quickly fall apart again.
You witness persistence, and that's where change happens.
The one thing they have in common is a determination to keep going.
Hi there, welcome to CNN World Sport this Thursday. I'm Patrick Snell. We do begin at the 150th Open Golf Championship and the battle for the coveted claret jug, where at this hour, American great Tiger Woods out on the iconic old course at St Andrews. Let's check the leaderboard there at the home of golf. It's the USA's Cameron Young leading the way at 8 under par right now after a superb round of 64 earlier. And tell you what, though, look at this. Hot on his heels, Northern Ireland's four-time major winner, Mr. Rory McIlroy, who fired a 66 earlier to get to 6 under par, just 2 shots back, though. I can tell you a really, really tough start for the 15-time major winner, Woods. Let's get straight out to St Andrews then, where we do find CNN World Sports' Alex Thomas. Alex, early struggles for Tiger, who the thousands out there on the course have been clamouring to see as he teed off. What's been happening to him?
Yeah, and we went out on the course, me and my producer Dan here, just to see what sort of atmosphere Tiger Woods was generating. Remember, this is only his 3rd appearance of the season, back to competitive golf against the odds after that horrific car crash last year, where he almost lost his leg, his injuries were so bad. And at first his goal was just simply to walk properly again. Then when he realised he could play competitive golf, he said he was always targeting an appearance here, not at just any old Open, a tournament that he loves, but the 150th Open at St Andrews, the home of golf, over the old course, which he calls his favourite course in the world. It's not loving him back, Patrick, it's fair to say that. 4 over par after the opening 4 holes, including a double bogey at the very first hole where his tee shot ended up in a divot and his approach landed in the burn in front of the green. And what was interesting about being in the gallery was that despite the huge numbers following him, and I can hear a bit of a roar going up behind us because that's where he is in the distance in the background behind me here now, there wasn't much atmosphere. He wasn't giving any of his huge following anything to cheer about. He's a 3-time major winner, 2 of those Open titles coming here at St Andrews, including a record low score in 2000. But he is a shadow of himself right now, but there'll be plenty of people willing him to turn that around, Patrick.
Yeah, you know what? And he still has the holes to do. We shall see. In stark contrast, though, Alex, Rory McIlroy with a really emphatic statement of intent today, right? What's impressed you most about Rory so far on day one?
Just his quiet determination. We were talking about how he appeared to the press in his press conference in the build-up to this tournament. And compared to Tiger, who sort of had a bit of a twinkle in his eye still and is still talking a good game and has plenty of confidence, always says he can win, Rory McIlroy seemed a bit down on himself, but he's been in great form. He's back up to number 2 in the world rankings, and he just quietly and confidently went about his business. 7 birdies, just 1 drop shot, could have been even better, frankly, and he is absolutely in the running after day one. Although we have said that before about Rory. Remember, he won 4 majors by the age of 26. He's had nothing in terms of major titles since 2014, although he's had many excellent seasons since then. We know he's got the game for it. if he had the mentality Tiger Woods had, he'd have as many major titles as Tiger and Nicklaus. There's no doubt about that. His game is in working order. He just needs to keep the pressure off himself over the next 3 days. He missed this Open at St Andrews in 2015 because he hurt himself playing football with his mates in the build-up. But we know he can play around here. He's still got the record for the lowest first-round score in an Open at St Andrews, which was 63 back in 2010 as he was bursting onto the scene. And he's still got that in him, that's for sure.
Yeah, he wants that career major number 5. A bit of a surprise name atop the leaderboard. Tell us more about him.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to look at my notes here because Cameron Young probably isn't even a household name in his own household. This is a guy who was only playing on the Corn Ferry Tour, one of the Challenger Tours, not a full PGA Tour member as recently as last year. 25 years old from Scarborough, New York. He had 8 birdies, no drop shots on his Open debut. He's leading the way. We often get surprise leaders on day one, though, Patrick. The real test is whether he can stay there.
All right, we shall see. Yep, many intriguing hours and days ahead. Alex Thomas and the team there at St Andrews, thank you so much. All right, well, the extreme heat continuing at what's already a grueling Tour de France. The expert views of 2012 winner Bradley Wiggins are just ahead.
I've been traveling through memories of my life, learning something new each and every time. On my way,
We will govern for 100 years.
His vision is almost messianic.
Bannon sees himself as the narrator in a grand conspiracy of his own devising.
In rare interviews, CNN investigates the man and his master plan.
It's like you have no proof. We've looked at all the facts.
What did Bannon bring to you?
Bannon was calling the plays. He seems to have no limits.
CNN Special Report, Steve Bannon, Divided We Fall, Monday on CNN.
To open doors and to unlock secrets, it takes trust.
This was the Duchess's first news interview.
Trust that you'll be accurate and you'll be fair. It was an unprecedented move.
Very eerie. All the roads have been closed off.
The Apache attack helicopter.
This is what Captain Wales has been flying.
Do you want talks with them?
Huge amounts of police support.
Rare access indeed.
That's what it's all about.
Max Foster, CNN.
We are back with cycling's toughest challenge, namely the world-famous Tour de France. At this hour, competitors faced with the daunting challenge of trying to handle the 165-kilometre Stage 12, which finishes with the iconic Alpe d'Huez climb on the Bastille Day as well. It is in France. On Wednesday, the coveted maillot jaune, or the yellow jersey, dramatically changing hands after the Danish cyclist Jonas Vingegaard powers his way through to seize the overall lead after a gripping final climb of Stage 11. Now, the 25-year-old Dane, who had been 39 seconds adrift at one point, bursting clear of the two-time defending champion from Slovenia, Tadej Pogačar, on the Col du Granon to seal his first Tour stage victory. Well, 10 years ago now, in 2012, Sir Bradley Wiggins becoming the first British rider to win the Tour de France. He also won 5 Olympic golds during his storied career. Now retired, he's become Eurosport's GCN cycling expert and fronts their innovative segment, Brad on a Bike, getting up close and personal with some of the world's best cyclists while they're literally in action on the bike. Earlier, Bradley speaking to me during Stage 12 about the continuing excellence of that man Vingegaard.
Yesterday, he took it to the two-time winner, Tadej Pogačar. And he's just a young kid, you know, he's not been in the sport very long, but he's hit the heights very quickly. He's Danish, he aims to be the first Danish winner since Bjarne Riis in 1996. He was actually born in 1996, but he's in yellow with an incredibly strong team around him with Wout van Aert, who's pretty much sealed the green jersey competition. But you see me now, we're just coming off the Col de Galibier, hitting speeds of well in excess of 100 kilometers an hour here, and I'm so close, you can't see it on the camera at the moment, but there's a rider in front of me, Nelson Oliveira from Portugal, and I could almost touch him. He's that close to me, and it's such a privilege to be in such a close proximity to these riders.
Yeah, just an incredible vantage point, so strong visually as well. Really feel like we're part of the race. Let's talk more about Pogačar, trying to win it for a third straight year. You know what it's like to be the one they're all trying to beat, Bradley. To what extent, though, in your expert view, might he just be feeling some kind of pressure right now?
Yeah, well, his team's been hit quite hard, the UAE team, with a couple of positive COVID tests, so they've had to withdraw from the race. So he's pretty low on teammates, which is a big thing in the Tour de France. You know, you can't win the Tour de France alone. You need a strong squad of 7 riders around you. So his back's up against the wall. But Tadej Pogačar, when his back's up against the wall, he comes back out on the offensive. And let's not write him off just yet. He's the reason he's won the Tour de France 2 times running. And I think today...